that Vesta's also in there, it is leaning romantic, and the rest of the placements are all very romantic as well. So this is an example of a past life love connection. Definitely giving kind of like Romeo and Juliet vibes. The past life connection is you came from this bitch. Like you entered the world through this person. Like you exist as a result of that person existing in your past life. They would have been the creme de la creme. They would have been top kind of like, they would have been one of the top families of the time that they were born in. Welcome back to the Wilding Astro Tarot YouTube channel for another astrology video on something that does get requested a lot in my comment section. Obviously, I use astrology to talk about past lives a lot, so y'all are frequently asking me to clarify how to read past life connections in astrology. And so this video is going to be explaining how to read past lives in astrology, kind of my method, very specific to me, the thing that I found works for me based on, you know, I think I'm quite sensitive to past life connections. Like I have like a sensation of them a lot of the times. And so I tend to be like, this is probably one of my strengths as an astrologer, being able to read past life connections in the chart. So I'm just going to explain how I read it, how I look at it, and then show you some examples of, at the end, of charts that I like know what the past life connection is. That's what today's video is going to be about. If you've been wanting to figure out how to read past lives in the chart, I'm going to teach you how to do it. So buckle up, let's get into it. So when I'm reading a Synastry chart for past life connections, the three main things that I look at is the South Node, the 12th house, and the moon. I look at the South Node usually first, then the 12th house second, the moon last. And the reason why you look at these three particular placements is because the South Node has really strong past life connections. The way that it's connected to the past life is it can be more of a minimizing energy. So it's an energy that you've kind of mastered and are bringing into this life kind of like really good with. The 12th house stores unseen realms such as past lives. The 12th house is like more things that can repeat, whereas the South Node essentially are things that probably aren't going to repeat most of the time. They might, but potentially they won't. And then finally, you look at the moon, and you look at the moon after you look at the 12th and 12th house and South Node as kind of like an extra clarifier. If there's nothing going on with the 12th house and South Node, you don't necessarily need to look at the moon. Like I personally probably wouldn't take anything that just the moon is saying super to heart. I'd only kind of use it more as like a clarifying energy if there's anything kind of unclear with the two other things that you've already looked at. And this is because the moon is the sign of the soul, so it can house things like past life connections. It's also the thing that you mostly want to look at for things like soul family. Usually there'll be something going on with the moon if you've got soul family with someone. So that's like the main things that you want to look at the moon for, like clarifying and just like general kind of like soul connection, soul family kind of stuff is all moon energy. And so the major things you're checking for is mostly conjunctions. Conjunctions are like top tier past life connection energy. So you're looking for conjunctions with the South Node and the moon, more so the South Node than the moon. And then you can look at any other major aspects, but if there's no conjunction going on, it's just like less of a kind of sure sign, if you will. And then you're also looking to see if one person's placements land in another person's 12th house, and you're also looking for what house aligns with the other person's 12th house. So some houses are relationship orientated, like the 7th house, 5th house, 8th house, and having one of those houses on the other person's 12th house is more of a like romantic vibe. And then obviously 10th on the 12th might be more of a career vibe. 11th on the 12th might be more of like you were in each other's kind of like community or like general sphere. Fourth house, probably your family. Third house, potentially like a neighbor, also potentially a sibling. So yeah, kind of how the houses align with the 12th house also is quite telling of potentially the relationship you had just in general. However, you wouldn't rely on that alone. So if you don't have any placements falling in each other's 12th house, I wouldn't rely just on the house alone. Once you've looked at the placements and you definitely have past life synastry with the South Node, 12th house and potentially the moon as well, that's when I would count that in. I would kind of count that last, if that makes sense. Because yeah, how things align in itself might not, it's just not a strong enough sign in itself, to be honest. And so definitely you want to take placements into consideration first, and the placements all have kind of a different vibe that they're bringing. So any of the major placements being in either your 12th house or on your South Node usually gives you the best kind of information about what your past life relationship was. So the sun is associated with being a father figure to the South Node person or to the 12th house person. Can also be a child to the South Node person or the 12th house person. Moon, kind of similar vein, can be the mother of the person with the 12th house or South Node, potentially also the child, but usually you'd interpret it as the mother first. Same with the sun, I go kind of 50-50. Sometimes it's child, sometimes it's father. With the moon, I lean way more maternal. The other two interpretations for these is that you came from the same paternal blood and the same maternal blood, alternatively. And so if you had your synastry in, say, the third house with someone, and some of the other placements seemed a bit more siblingy, then the sun and the moon could be like you were their like sibling from their paternal blood or your maternal blood or whatever it may be. So the primary interpretation would be sun 50-50, father or child, moon mostly mother, potentially also the child as a slight chance, and then also from the paternal blood, from the maternal blood, potentially as well. Something like a Mercury energy, because Mercury is very trickstery, I would associate it more with like maybe either a sibling, a partner in crime of some kind, but someone that you know very well. So someone who was around you a lot in a past life, like you spent a lot of time with. Could potentially just be like a neighbor or someone in your community, like very close by. But yeah, someone who's kind of like definitely around. Venus most likely is a lover. Mars can be lover, rival, sexual partner. Mars can be a lot of things. Mars often indicates either like lots of passion or lots of conflict. Can go either way. There's also Saturn, which can be an authority figure, boss, someone who worked in your local government potentially. Also could be like a friend or a colleague. Uranus is usually more friendly vibes. But here's a summary page describing the most common interpretations for the major placements, either conjuncting the South Node or having synastry with the 12th house. This is the best place to start with your interpretation, having an open mind and understanding all of the possibilities that each major placement can describe. But then once you proceed with your analyses, there should be a common theme that starts to make itself apparent, that keeps repeating itself in the past life synastry placements, that will make one possibility stand out more than the rest. Also, you might have conjunctions to some of the lines of the chart. So if you have South Node or Moon conjunctions to someone's descendant, most likely you're either a romantic partner, much more likely that you are actually married. If it's a descendant conjunction, Venus is just like general lover, but when it's the descendant line, most likely you guys were married. The other interpretation for descendant line conjunctions is some sort of other one-on-one relationship, like potentially work together, had a business relationship. This one can also be rivals as well. But this is where you look into other placements that confirm. Usually when you've got past life connections with someone, you won't just have one thing show up in the chart. You'll have like multiple things. So if you have descendant synastry and then also maybe Mars synastry, that could be like more rivalry. But if you have descendant synastry and like some romantic or like family kind of vibes, most likely you're married in the rest of the synastry. So you kind of got to like, it's kind of like adding stuff up and figuring out what the sum of all of these different conjunctions are. Like, what's the general vibe that all of these things are saying? Like, what are all these conjunctions kind of like giving a general energy of? Like, kind of what's the overall vibe? That's how you would interpret it. Ascendant synastry, it really depends what the other placements are to how you would interpret that. And I'll give you a bit of an example later. I see conjunctions, so the family line conjunctions are often like family related, like potentially you were either related by blood or by marriage. And then MC is more like business, like out in the world energy, like potentially you worked together, you worked for them, they worked for you. For those sort of things, you'd look at, do we have Saturn synastry or something like that? Like that's what you're looking for. That's kind of the vibe. So yeah, they're the main placements where you would see strong conjunctions if you had a past life connection with them and what they potentially would mean. And then you need to take into consideration which houses these conjunctions are happening in. So for example, if you have a conjunction with someone that has to do with one of you being the parent of the other, so like a moon south node or a sun south node or something like that with someone, you look at what house it's in. If it is in the 5th house, usually that might sway you more towards a child interpretation. The other interpretation is it's the first child. So 5th house is the first child, 7th is the second, 9th is the third. So if you have parent-child synastry with someone from a past life, you can look at what house it's in to know like exactly what kind of parent-child relationship you had with them, like whether they were your firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn. 11th house is fourthborn, can also be adoption, but most likely you'll interpret it as fourthborn child. But here's a summary table of the most common interpretations of where our past life conjunctions with another person fall either in our chart or their chart. This is kind of like the extra influence that you would take into consideration after you've taken into consideration what the actual conjunctions are and what the major placement that's conjunct either a moon or a south node would mean. In general, the 5th, 7th and 8th houses are the strongest houses for having past life romantic connections with people, but anything on the western side of the chart, so anything between particularly the 5th and 9th house, tends to be strong for having past life romantic connections with people. The 3rd and 4th houses and potentially the 2nd house as well tend to lean more familial. So 3rd house is usually strongest for siblings, but also can be neighbors or people that you know well. The 4th house leans towards the mother and maternal figures, but also any family, relative kind of person, whether that's blood or through marriage. 2nd house is a really comfortable connection with someone who's potentially a provider or provided security, which is why it leans a little bit more familial. And then the 9th, 10th and 11th house tends to be more people that were out in the world around us a lot more. So the 9th house tends to be like one of our teachers, especially like spiritual leaders and teachers, someone who potentially governs some sort of religious body around us. There's also 10th house associations to like bosses, colleagues, or people within our realm that were a public persona, maybe a little bit famous, maybe of high social status, or maybe had a really strong reputation in the community that we grew up in. And then the 11th is like a more general, they were around. They were maybe our friend, maybe a colleague, maybe just part of our community. This one can also be someone that we have had some sort of soul contract with. So you'd really look at what the major placement conjunctions are to the past life placement, so the south node or the moon, to see what that soul contract might be. But it landing in the 11th house can be indicative of having some sort of soul contract with someone. The 1st and 6th houses tend to be the most vague. The 6th house is usually someone who was maybe like a healer or a doctor in the community, or someone who provided some sort of even like therapy, like it could be any kind of healing, can do with physical health, mental health, any kinds of health, or someone who was kind of around, especially someone who was part of your everyday routine, potentially someone who was a service provider to you. And then the 1st house is probably the hardest one to read. I'll give you an example later on about what the interpretation can be, but it usually has to do with someone's physical existence, their physical body's physical existence, or something to do with the self, the identity, the body, and who you are physically in the world, or why you exist in the world in some kind of way. So the house information tends to be a really good clarifier. So for example, if you had a South Node Venus conjunction in the 7th house, it's more likely that you actually were married to that person, if that's the case, given that the 7th house governs marriages. However, if you had a South Node Venus conjunction in the 5th house, it's definitely romantic, but I would expect that it was less likely to result in a marriage and more likely kind of like a lover from when you were younger, potentially something that didn't work out. So yeah, the houses can provide additional context after you've taken into consideration what the major placement conjunction is with those past life indicators, so the South Node and Moon. So now I'll show you two different examples of definite past life connections and how you can read those past life connections in the chart. So for this first example, the very first thing we obviously look at is South Node vibes. And you can see that this red person has a Gemini moon exactly conjunct this blue person's South Node. So not only is this a really good indication of being from the same soul family, given that the moon is the sign of the soul, and potentially these two people have incarnated with each other a lot in the past. The moon is obviously a more maternal energy on top of the other person's past life energy. It's also happening in the 9th house, which is the 3rd child. So 1st child 5th, 2nd child 7th, 3rd child 9th, 4th child 11th. So yeah, it's very likely that the red person was the mother of the blue person, and the blue person was the 3rd child of the red person. You can also see a little bit over that the red person's South Node is sitting right at the cusp of the blue person's 9th house. So you've kind of got double past life in the 9th house synastry there, indicating that the blue person was definitely the 3rd child of the red person. And then a little bit over from that, again, kind of looking at moon synastry, which you look at after the South Node. You've got a moon Ceres conjunction. Ceres is the biggest space body, celestial body, in the solar system, aside from Pluto, that isn't a planet, because technically Pluto isn't a planet. It's a dwarf planet. Ceres is like kind of a similar kind of realm of things, so it is quite an important asteroid to look at. And Ceres has ties to family energy. So anytime you see Ceres, think family. You were like, yeah, some sort of family vibe with them. And Ceres can have kind of like connotations of a more nurturing kind of love. And it does lean a little bit maternal. So when I first saw this chart, I was like, for a second, I was like tossing and turning of like who was the parent of whom, because I saw this, I saw the moon on top of Ceres, which the moon should overpower Ceres because the moon's obviously a lot stronger. But then I saw the moon South Node conjunction that was really exact. I was like, well, obviously the red person was the mother of the blue person in that case, because you can see, yeah, like what overpowers what and who's the main mum energy. You can also see that because the Ceres and Moon conjunction happens in both people's 8th house, that definitely there was some shared kind of like finances or something. Most likely that their finances were intertwined in some way, given that the 8th house governs shared assets. And given that the red person has a south node in Taurus, usually this indicates someone who in a past life was probably a bit of a socialite, rich, kind of aristocratic kind of family. That's kind of the vibe of a south node in Taurus. Most likely they were, part of a wealthy family. And so it kind of looks like they were part of like generational wealth, or they were essentially taken care of by their family from previous generations based on that kind of like 8th house synastry. And since you can see the South Node Moon conjunction happens in obviously the red person's 9th house, but the blue person's 10th house, most likely that means that this family was also in the public eye. Or they were just like, they were, because the 10th house has things to do with like social hierarchies, reputation, social status, and the 10th house is like as high as that can possibly go. They would have been the creme de la creme. They would have been top kind of like, they would have been one of the top families of the time that they were born in. So they're born into like a very wealthy family. They were well taken care of financially. They're also like kind of very visibly high social status people. I don't know really how to describe this, but yeah, you can see that they ranked higher socially based on that 10th house energy. So after you look at what's going on with the South Node, usually you'll look at the 12th house next. We've also looked at the moons just because it happens to be lots of moon energy with the South Node with these people, which often is an indicator of being from the same soul family when you have lots of South Node, Moon and Ceres energy. Like those three things definitely give soul family vibes. But then you would look at the 12th house synastry. So for the 12th house synastry, the red person, their 12th house sits on the blue person's 1st house. Because we know that the red person was most likely the mother of the blue person, this makes sense because it's literally saying the blue person, their whole body, their whole self came from the red person in a past life. So like their past life connection is you came from this bitch, like you entered the world through this person, like you exist as a result of that person existing in your past life. So that's kind of funny. And like, that's what I mean when it comes to the 1st house synastries. Usually it'll be something like that going on. And in the reverse, the blue person's 12th house sits on the red person's like start of their end of their 10th house and start of their 11th house. So as we were talking about before with the 10th house is like social status, like the blue person was potentially born into like a higher social status family, which was the red person. And then 11th house is like who you spend a lot of your time with. So who was in your community, like who was like around. So yeah, it's like a little bit like born into high social status, and then also like potentially they were in community together, like spent a lot of time together, and yeah, did stuff together for sure. Like a lot of what they were doing would have been for the community and it would have been together. So obviously these two people have quite strong past life synastry up until this point. But if they didn't, I might not assume that they had any past life synastry just based on which placements fall in each other's 12th house, because they both only have asteroids falling in each other's 12th house. So it's really all the other placements that give a strong indicator that these two were, tied in a past life. So the red person has a Chiron asteroid in the blue person's 12th house. So this is the wounded healer energy. So this can indicate like having some, like obviously having a lot of healing energy between the two people, but also potentially having some past life wounds mixed in there as well that probably will get worked out in this life. But also they have the blue person's destiny asteroid falling in the red person's 12th house. So this is like an energy of like definitely being like a fated connection in their past life and potentially in this life as well, given that the 12th house is more likely to be stuff that repeats than the south node is, given that the south node's more of a minimizing energy. So yeah, it looks like they definitely felt like kind of like potentially like fated soulmate kind of vibes in their past life, even though they were mother and child. And most likely, again, they'll be in some sort of like destined, fated connection. And it'll feel like that. It'll feel like that to both of them, that it's like a point of destiny for each of them. So yeah, I wouldn't go off asteroids alone. Asteroids aren't super strong. They're a little bit weaker. And the good news about having 12th house synastry that's asteroids is it doesn't feel as intense. It doesn't feel as pulling in a certain direction to repeat certain things. Like it definitely doesn't look like they'll repeat a lot just because they don't have a lot of placements to repeat. But asteroids in themselves are a lot weaker. Whereas if they had strong planets in each other's 12th house, that to me would indicate like potentially having a lot more stuff to work out, because yeah, planets tend to be stronger than asteroids. This is kind of a little bit more free in this life, I would say. A little bit more, yeah, a little bit just like not as chaotic, intense, crazy stuff from their past life to work out. Like it should be like pretty chill, like their past life stuff. It shouldn't be a lot of karma that they have to deal with. However, in contrast, these two people have a lot more karma with each other. This one's a lot more complicated, what went down in a past life. So you can start with the blue person south node. You can see that the red person's descendant line, so marriage line, exactly conjuncts that person's south node. And they also have like a bit of a wide Vesta conjunction, a little bit outside of that conjunction. Vesta's the flame that doesn't go out. Descendant line is some sort of partnership line. Given that Vesta's also in there, it is leaning romantic, and the rest of the placements are all very romantic as well. So this is an example of a past life love connection. First of all, you've got descendant conjunct the south node with Vesta in the 7th house, obviously indicating that most likely these two people were married. But then also if you look at the other person's descendant line, the red person's moon also conjuncts that descendant line, which again is because the moon's tied with the soul connections, again, past life lover, past life marriage partner, married romantic partner. And then when we check out the red person's south node, you can see that the red person's south node sits on a conjunction to their own 5th house. And it sits in the blue person's 8th house. So the 8th house is a sign of like usually a romantic soulmate. It's definitely giving kind of like Romeo and Juliet vibes, but you can also see the blue person's moon is also there. So you have the moon of the blue person falling in the red person's 5th house of like kind of romance, dating, and then the south node of the red person falling in the blue person's 8th house of soulmate. So it's definitely very giving romantic there as well. It is a wide conjunction between the south node and moon, but it's still close enough that it would be considered conjunct. Ideally, you want something like exactly conjunct, so like between 0 and kind of 1 degree apart. Kind of 5 is reasonable. Within 10 is also considered a very wide conjunction, but a conjunction. Any more than 10 degrees, personally, I wouldn't count it. Like even between 5 and 10, even that's a bit of a stretch. So then after we've looked at the moon and south node, we've looked at both of their moons and both their south nodes. Now we can look at the 12th house. So you'll see the red person's 12th house right at the bottom, that the blue person's sun and Vesta directly conjunct that person's Jupiter. Jupiter's the husband or the wife in astrology. So you've got kind of sun, which rules the 5th house, so again can be romantic. Vesta's the flame that doesn't go out, so you've got like lots of romance sitting right on top of the kind of like soulmate husband wife energy. So again, this is like another sign that they were married in a past life. And the blue placements are what is the blue person's bringing into the red person's past life. So the blue person brought like light, probably children, given that the sun's associated with the 5th house of children. The blue person probably had that red person's babies in a past life. And Vesta's the flame that doesn't go out. So the blue person definitely, I would say if anything, the blue person might have loved the red person a little bit more. And I'll explain why that's a little bit more likely in a second. So yeah, blue's bringing like lots of love, the love that doesn't go out, probably the mother of the red person's children. Like that's just a lot of, there's a lot of energy, to be in that other person's 12th house. And you can see that also there's the blue person, it's the 3rd and 4th house that lines up with the red person's 12th house. So 3rd is like most likely they'll probably like neighbors, they probably lived near each other in their past life, but then eventually became family, which is why they have this conjunction to the blue person's IC line, which is their family line, and then also part of their 4th house of family is also on it. So definitely they were married, definitely they had kids, or at least one child, and yeah, they were probably neighbors before they fell in love, and then got married, had a family, all within probably wherever they lived. So in this chart where things get a little bit complicated is when you look at the blue person's 12th house. So in the blue person's 12th house, you have the red person's Mars, Ceres and vertex placement all falling. So vertex is like fate. It's definitely giving fate energy, and it's very close to the cusp of the blue person's 12th house. So there was some sort of like fated lesson connection with them in their past life, and it was definitely destined that they got married and had a family together, given that Ceres is also in there. And then the complicated thing with Mars is, like I was saying before, passion, but also conflict. So it seems like the red person was bringing conflict into the blue person's life. The only thing that I can really see the conflict being is that the red person has their Vesta, so their flame that doesn't go out, conjunct the descendant south node in the blue person's 10th house, which we've discussed. This is the same blue person as the blue person from the previous example. So this person we most likely think was in a wealthy family, very high social status, and given that this kind of conjunction is happening in that 10th house again, it kind of looks like the red person might have been marrying into their family. I'm not saying that's the only reason why they're married into their family. They have lots of romantic synastry, so I'd assume not. But potentially that's like the main thing that I can see would have been the source of like tension and conflict. Potentially the blue person was interpreting the red person as maybe marrying them for the money, the fame, the success, the family, the social status, something like that. Like that's the main thing that I can see. So yeah, it does look like there was conflict. You can see that the blue person's Chiron asteroid, which is the wounded healer, just sits a little bit away from the red person's Mars. So this person definitely hurt them in their last life. There's a lot of passion there, but also conflict and pain. So potentially in this life, there's just going to be some pain that carries over that has to do with whatever went down between these two people in their past life. Potentially there's still some kind of active wounds from their past life. and the blue person is potentially on a, like, just, yeah, they're going to be hurt still from them, probably. You can see here again, there's romantic synastry with the 12th house as well, given that the red person has their 8th house on top of the blue person's 12th house. So again, 8th house is like soulmatey vibes. So yeah, they have lots of 5th, 8th and 7th house, 5th, 7th and 8th house synastry with past life connections in it. So it's giving strong, we're married in a past life, and we're like soulmates in a past life, given that there's that Jupiter connection. They've got lots of 8th house synastry. Like, yeah, they were definitely soulmates in a past life. And yeah, I think the blue person ended up hurt about the red person. But it was like a fated connection. And I'm sure before, or I don't know, potentially it was just like both of those things happening at once. Potentially there's a lot of passion, but also some conflict that the two experienced together. And so that's a really good example of a past life romantic connection that's obviously not sunshine and daisies, because what connection is all sunshine and daisies? Yeah, that's the vibe. That's a really good example of a romantic connection between two people, and like how you can read that in a chart. And you can see it, like it's a theme that will repeat itself. Usually you'll have the same thing kind of said a whole bunch of different ways. And so once you kind of notice one, usually you'll notice like 3 or 4 other things that say the same thing. And so yeah, that's how you would read past life lovers synastry. Hopefully those 2 real examples of past life connections, where there's a family example, past life lover example, really helped apply it. I find that's the kind of the biggest step. Like once you understand all of the kind of implications around the placements, the houses, things like that, and kind of know how to read what the south node means, what the 12th house means, what the moon means, it's mostly the hardest bit is like trying to put it all together. And like if it helps, like write a list of like what all the conjunctions are and what the interpretations of those can mean, and then you'll be able to start just looking at it and then just picking out, okay, so if this theme seems to repeat themselves in all of these conjunctions, and so this is what I'm interpreting as the explanation, or the what the soul connection was, what the past life connection was, based on what the theme that keeps recurring in itself. You want something to repeat itself, usually at least 2 or 3 times. If it's only there once, usually that's not strong enough energy to go off alone. Potentially it's just, yeah, I wouldn't rely on just one thing. I'd rely on like preferably 3 things, it repeating itself 3 times, but at least 2. You want something to repeat itself twice, at the very least, but preferably like 3-ish, 3 or more times. You can see in both of these examples, it was kind of like very repetitive, like kind of each thing was saying the same thing again and again, like it was repeating, they were your parent, they were your mother, like they were your child, or it's repeating, they were your lover, they were the person you married, like you had a family with them. Like you'll see those repetitions, and that's how you know you're interpreting it correctly, when there's a very clear theme to all of the possible past life placements, when there's a very big theme to the south node conjunctions or south node placements, the moon conjunctions or moon placements, and the 12th house the 12th house synastry. So yeah, once you see that, it should be a lot clearer. So yeah, hope that helped. Hope the examples helped. Apply the knowledge. Do also have synastry readings available if you'd like to just request one with me. I can do all this for you and tell you if you have any soul connections. I have like mini soul connection readings too. If you don't want to get like a full synastry reading, that's available for you too. I think that's about all I have to say and share about this topic. So yeah, I'll leave this video here. Thank you so much for supporting me at Wilding Astro Tarot by watching this video all the way through. I would also love if you could give it a like, comment, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more content like this. The more that you engage with this content, the better it is for the YouTube algorithm and the more support I will get, which I appreciate. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. So yeah, thank you so much for supporting me on this channel. And until I see you again, ciao.